Hi there folks, I hope that you're well and that you're safe. While the topic of this video, long distance road trips in electric cars that aren't Teslas, might appear a little insensitive to release, right about now, we actually recorded this way back at the start of the month before the world we now find ourselves in existed. And rather than sit on it any further, I've decided to release it because I'd like to think that this gives you some hope for the future when things have gone back to normal, or near to. In the meantime, enjoy the video, stay safe, and know that we are all in this together.
At the very start of February, our friends over at Fully Charged held the first ever Fully Charged Live USA event in Austin, Texas. Having attended Fully Charged Live in the UK every year since its inception, we didn't want to miss it for the world. But because we are trying to minimise our flying as much as possible, we decided to drive there in my 2017 Chevrolet Bolt EV LT. The only problem? It was 4,710 miles round trip, or about 7,580 kilometres. Yeah. A lot of people found out about the trip and they simply scoffed and told us in no uncertain terms that we would most definitely not be able to make it unless we took a Tesla. We'd done our homework and we'd planned enough days to actually make the trip. So just before the end of January, myself, my co-host Kate Walton-Elliott and Erin packed up Artemis, that's what I call my Bolt, named after the heroine of Ernie Cline's 2011 book Ready Player One. Yes, the book, not the film, and headed south. Here's what we learned and what we'd change in the future about making a trip like this. The travel itself was really easy, and frankly, we'd not have driven any further per day in an internal combustion engine car than we did in an EV, because the stops we were making would have been stops we would have needed to have made in an ICE car too, stretching your legs, going to the loo, that kind of thing. But nevertheless, lessons were learned. First up, let me state the obvious. Texas is a really long way from Portland, Oregon. I know it's probably a thing most of you already know, but as a Brit who moved to the US in 2015 and only became a US citizen last year, I don't think the phenomenal size the country had really hit me until this trip. Sure, I'd followed my wife, Kate Gordon-Bloomfield, not Kate Walton-Elliott, when she made a trip from Portland to Missouri to see her family in a Chevrolet Bolt EV. And I'd seen how long that took her. And I did a 4-day round trip to Los Angeles by myself last year. And I've driven to and from Las Vegas for 2 years in a row for CES. So I had some experience of deserts and travelling long distance. But travelling 2,200 and some miles across some pretty varied terrain in parts of the world you don't know takes it all out of you. It's not so much the distance per se, it's the hours and hours in the car with the same people. And I think that's something that would be true for any electric car and any car trip full stop. I love my colleagues and I'm lucky to call them friends, but I think we were all sick and tired of each other after what amounted to 4 days of driving, followed by 3 days in Texas, and then another 4 driving back. With the obvious out of the way, let's deal with the practicalities of charging. While we were able to make use of the Electrify America network for the majority of their trip, and yes, I have a membership which dramatically reduced the cost of charging to about $300 and some for EA sessions for the entirety of the trip, we didn't actively plan for the amount of time that we'd be stopped charging en route. While a better route planner, our route planner of choice, was pretty accurate about our energy consumption while we were on the road, it didn't quite replicate charging sessions accurately, and we would find ourselves gradually slipping behind on schedule as the day progressed, usually because the car didn't charge quite as quickly as a better route planner thought it should. The other thing we didn't plan for was the occasional faffing at each stop, usually to reposition the car when we happened to pull into a stall that wasn't working. To be clear, we never arrived at a site where all of the stations were out of order, but that was because EA uses CCS charging stations, that's Chargeway Green 4 through Green 7, depending on the car and its power level, rather than CHAdeMO, which is Chargeway Blue connectors. And there are enough charging stations at each site that are compatible with our car, and that's there to provide enough redundancy to reduce problems to a statistically small risk. But a friend of ours who drove a far older CHAdeMO-compatible Kia Soul EV from Seattle to Texas found several of the EA sites with no working connectors because EA only has one CHAdeMO-compatible charging station at each location. That severely hampered his travel plans. How would we change all of the above? Well, for us, we'd just plan extra time at each site to ensure we got the charge needed. But for CHAdeMO cars, I wouldn't attempt it. Also related to charging is the fact that, as we discovered multiple times on trip, it's best to pretend your car has half the range it does. That's not because it actually has low range, but because it's far quicker to drive the first leg with a full battery pack to empty than to charge up to between 60 and 70% before hitting the road again. Pulling off for charging a few hours later and repeating that process, that's better than trying to charge to 80% or 90% and then make longer jumps between charges. Why? As batteries near full, charging slows down to protect the car's battery pack. And that really means that while it's quick to get from empty to 50%, getting from 50% to 80% and then from 80% to 100% gets progressively longer. On the legs where we had absolutely no choice but to charge all the way up to 80 or 90%, our charge stops took over an hour, sometimes nearly 90 minutes or even 120 minutes. But when we knew there was another charging station 100 miles or so down the road, we were able to pull in, blast up to as much as we needed in 30 to 40 minutes, so maybe 50 or 60%, and then hit the road again. Related to that is the fact that we learned pretty quickly that stopping more frequently and driving at normal speeds with traffic was far more pleasant than trying to hypermile in order to squeeze out every last mile and skip charging stations. On days when we combined this with the previous technique, we actually saved time and weren't that far off our better route planner predictions. Coming back to Portland from Texas, we managed more than 750 miles in one day using that technique. Admittedly, we left at 8 a.m. local time and arrived at 1:30 in the morning the next day, but it was certainly less stressful and less tiring not having to squeeze the range out. I mean, that day I actually drove 500 of those miles myself. The next lesson we learned was that overnight charging is an absolute essential on any electric car road trip, as is a decent hotel. Sure, you can stay in El Crappy Motel with questionable linen on the bed and creatures in the closet and dodgy heating, but spending a little more for a place with a decent bed, good breakfast and known reliable overnight charging is essential for your own sanity and for the sanity of the people you're travelling with. On the nights when we were able to get a full overnight charge, our following day's travel was a lot easier. When it came to food and drink, we learned pretty quickly that PlugShare and other databases for charging can save you from yet another fast food outlet or some high sugar snack from Wally World. For some reason, most Electrify America charging stations are at Walmarts. We found some real gems of places to stay and places to eat because we researched as we drove. 2 shout-outs. The Garage in Fort Stockton, Texas, which is a really nice LGBTQIA+ friendly coffee house and music venue, and also happens to be the only decent coffee for 300 miles, and Wild Dogs Hot Dogs in Benson, Arizona. Both of these were hidden gems we were really glad we discovered using PlugShare. The final 2 things we learned are related to weather and terrain. While we knew the I-5 corridor on the west coast pretty well, we didn't know what lay ahead for us in Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. Luckily, a better route planner paired with a good ODB2 dongle allowed us to use real-time data from the car to allow us to keep on plan with energy consumption. This gave far better readings and predictions than even Tesla's route planning algorithm and allowed us to adjust our driving as required on the fly on longer stretches or in bad weather to make sure we arrived in one piece. It also allowed us to see what lay ahead in terms of elevation changes, something that was super helpful. What it couldn't help us with, though, was the weather. We had no idea how strong the headwinds in New Mexico and Arizona could be, and sadly had some really tough stages because of headwinds and tough driving conditions. While I'm sure most of us understand that rain, wind and snow can affect range, experiencing it in the desert really hammered that point home. So there you have it. Would we do the trip again? Maybe. but we give ourselves more time. The distances we covered per day were technically achievable, but they left us tired, and I think in future a few extra days either end would have helped us a lot. This summer, just ahead of July 4th, myself and Erin are stupidly driving cross-country from coast to coast in Artemis in aid of ALS research, and we've already agreed to add some extra time to ensure that we both arrive without killing each other at the end of it. But road trip in a Chevrolet Bolt? That is totally doable. And I think you'll agree, most of the things we've talked about would be issues regardless of what car you drive. So the next time someone tells you that Tesla is the only car you can drive long distance in, well, I'm sorry, that's just not true. That's it. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.